In an era when powerful empires were only just forming and centralized authority was a rarity, the star of a people whose adaptability and audacity became the true technological marvel of their time began to rise. These people, hailing from the northern lands, were not subject to a single monarch or a mighty government. Each Norwegian village operated as an independent unit, proclaiming its own chieftain or king. However, when it came to large-scale and audacious missions across the sea, the Vikings demonstrated striking unity, leaving their women and children behind and venturing into uncharted waters. Their primary objective was plunder, and accordingly, they armed themselves for this task with ruthless efficiency. Among the first to experience the full brunt of their relentless raids were the peaceful monks of Lindisfarne, a holy sanctuary dedicated to Cuthbert, in June 793 AD. Lindisfarne was more than just a monastery. It was considered one of the most sacred places in all the British Isles, abundant not only in spiritual piety, but also in very tangible treasures. Imagine, monks immersed in their daily rituals, ringing bells, heading to mass, and suddenly from the depths of the sea, like mythical dragons, these unseen ships appear. They descended upon the abbey with the fury and relentless force of a storm, sweeping everything in their path, destroying, plundering, and setting this holy place ablaze. For the monks, it was not merely an attack, it was hell on earth, and their descriptions of those events often compared the attackers to devils unleashed from the underworld to descend upon them. Undoubtedly, the Vikings were warriors to the core. Their existence was permeated by intimidation, fear, and pure terror. They were not so much soldiers in the traditional sense as they were ruthless raiders. They were characterized by exceptional ferocity, insatiable greed, and astonishing skill in warfare. Although they were often branded as barbarians, in reality, their battle formations and how they advanced towards their objectives demonstrated remarkable discipline and military organization. A Viking warrior was the embodiment of a simple but extremely effective fighting machine. Typically a large, muscular Scandinavian, often clad in simple leather armor. Each was armed with basic but deadly tools, a knife, a sword, and a battle axe. The battle axe, it is reported, was the most formidable of their arsenal, as Vikings possessed an incredible art of throwing these axes, capable of decapitating or disabling an opponent with a single throw. Monasteries located along the coast were particularly attractive to the Vikings, as vast riches accumulated there, and their inhabitants, the monks, were known for their passivity and inability to resist. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, begun in the late 800s, serves as one of the primary and most valuable sources for the history of England from the 5th to the 11th century. It vividly describes the horror brought by the Viking invasions, stating, "The ravaging of wretched heathen men miserably destroyed God's church at Lindisfarne by rapine and slaughter." This attack on the monks and their priceless treasures in 793 AD was truly a historic milestone, the first documented major Viking raid, ushering in a new era. However, Lindisfarne and other vulnerable monasteries along the coast of the British Isles were merely a prelude. As the 8th century drew to a close, Viking raiders began to set their sights on much larger prizes. Europe's powerful and prosperous cities were soon to feel the full force and fury of these Northmen and their formidable ships, and no one could foresee the scale of the coming upheavals. The Vikings left their Scandinavian homes not for conquest, but solely for plunder and enrichment. The attack on Lindisfarne in 793 AD was not just the first raid. It ignited the fire of Viking barbarity, a flame that threatened to engulf all of Europe. By the mid-9th century, just 50 years after the destruction of Lindisfarne, rumors of Europe's immense wealth, which could be easily carried away, had spread far north, reaching the most remote fjords. Families, entire villages, and even extensive communities united their efforts to build the legendary longships, capable of crossing the seas. They were determined to improve their lot at the expense of those living overseas. Much like the Spanish conquistadors who centuries later ventured to the Americas in search of gold, the Vikings sought silver. Silver was their greatest treasure, and it was from this precious metal that many religious objects, crosses, chalices, and other relics, abundantly stored in monasteries, were crafted. Dispersed Viking groups fanned out across the seas, lacking a single ruler who could unite them under one banner. Even as their fleets grew to dozens of formidable ships, each group operated independently, making the suppression of their raids even more challenging. The reputations of individual Viking chieftains began to grow rapidly, and with them, their ambitions. Europe, it seemed, was easy prey, offering immense wealth and minimal resistance. The European continent possesses a unique characteristic. It is crisscrossed by numerous rivers, almost all of which are navigable. Unlike North America or Africa, where only a few very large rivers dominate, Europe has an abundance of them. Thus, the Vikings could freely sail their vessels down almost any major waterway, penetrating deep into the heart of the continent. It should be remembered, their ships were narrow and long, allowing them to pass through shallow waters and requiring little depth. One of the first and most extensive riverine attacks occurred in 845 AD under the leadership of the infamous Viking chieftain Ragnar. With a fleet of 120 ships, he leveraged the lessons learned from the Lindisfarne raid with renewed vigor, applying the same methods to attack Paris, but on an incomparably larger scale. Before even reaching the city itself, Ragnar's Vikings ruthlessly destroyed a French vanguard on the banks of the Seine, leading their French captives to a horrific and agonizing death. Essentially, they were terrorists, and they relied heavily on terror to ease their path. They did not aim to do more work than necessary, so they sought to be as terrifying as possible in their actions. There was even one known Viking who was nicknamed the Child Lover, because he did not toss infants into the air to impale them on his sword as they fell, which speaks to a truly disgusting cruelty. The local monk Ermentarius described the Viking invasion and the devastation that continued for decades along the Seine and other rivers, leaving behind only ruins and despair. The number of ships grew each year. The endless stream of Vikings continued to inspire terror and awe. Everywhere, Christians became victims of mass killings, arson, and ruthless plunder. The Vikings conquered everything in their path, and it seemed nothing could stand against them. When a huge Viking fleet sailed down the Seine River and advanced on Paris, that vast and well-defended city, the King of France residing there chose not to engage them directly and avoid the potential destruction that would inevitably follow a battle. He made the decision to buy them off. King Charles the Bald paid Ragnar nearly 6 tons of silver and gold, hoping the raiders would leave and never return, but history would show that this was only a temporary reprieve. However, such notoriety for easy plunder, unfortunately, had the opposite effect. News of immense treasures spread quickly, and soon plundering and looting became widespread. The devastation of Northern Europe continued with even greater, relentless force. Between 790 and 1100 AD, Vikings, following every major river and waterway, penetrated deep into the continent. However, for these brave seafarers, an entirely new world also opened up. It was perhaps the Norwegians who wrote one of the most vivid and memorable chapters in Viking history. As fearless explorers, they not only colonized Iceland and Greenland, but continued their westward advance into unknown lands. Inextricably linked to this large-scale colonization is the story of 2 legendary Norwegian Vikings, Eric the Red and his son Leif Erikson. In the late 990s, Eric became the first to dare settle in the harsh and inhospitable land of Greenland. Eric, known for his fiery temper, was soon after forced to leave Iceland for 3 years. He headed west and settled on the eastern coast of Greenland. It was there that he actively advertised this new land, though he could not directly state that only a tiny coastal strip was livable. Instead, he proclaimed, "Since we have Greenland, it is covered in a vast amount of money," which, of course, was very strange. Come see what it's really like and go home. Nevertheless, many strong, resilient, and hardy Vikings remained, despite the extremely harsh living conditions. The land was largely unsuitable for farming, though fishing and hunting were available, but overall, it was an extremely inhospitable territory. During Eric the Red's rule, the Norwegian agrarian society struggled greatly to find sustenance in this distant and harsh world. For governance and common issues, villages gathered at the Althing, a type of popular assembly or court, a tradition brought from their homeland. Here, every free man had the right to speak in his own defense and discuss matters concerning the entire community. From this community of free people emerged Eric the Red Sun, Leif Erikson. Like his father, he burned with a thirst for exploration and discovery. In the year 1000, he set out on his famous voyage. Leif Erikson was guided by rumors. Another Viking before him had left a record that, while heading west to another colony in Greenland, he was blown off course and, when he finally regained his bearings, found himself off the coast of an unusually green and lush land. Greenland, as is known, was neither green nor lush. This aspect of history is extremely fascinating and still causes much debate. Many historians believe that America was discovered by Vikings around the year 1000. For example, archaeological evidence confirms that Leif Erikson's settlement in Newfoundland was carbon dated to exactly 1000 AD. Thus, it is known for certain that the Vikings reached at least Newfoundland and likely ventured even further south. Greenland's attempt to establish a permanent colony in Newfoundland lasted only a decade. However, 500 years before Christopher Columbus made his epic journey, the Vikings had already connected the eastern and western hemispheres. After wintering in Newfoundland, Leif Erikson returned to Greenland and introduced something entirely new to the island's settlers. With the same tools they used to build their famous longships, crude crosses of a new religion were now being erected. The settlers decided to convert. Leif Erikson, in turn, had previously traveled to Norway, where the king had specifically tasked him with bringing Christianity to Greenland and promoting the Christianization of the colonies, which he diligently fulfilled. As Viking influence spread, the wider world, in turn, began to actively shape Viking culture. Viking leaders adopted Christianity as a powerful means to unite scattered clans and, ultimately, to establish greater control over them. At the dawn of the 11th century, 2 centuries after the devastating attack on Lindisfarne, the peoples of the north still lacked a single ruler and had a very weak sense of solidarity. Christianity presented a potential cause for unification, but Christian Vikings faced fierce resistance from their pagan kin who were unwilling to abandon their ancient gods and traditions. Kings began adopting Christianity, seeing it as a tool to strengthen their own power, and started imposing it on their subjects. This led to numerous conflicts and fierce struggles, as people were unwilling to part with their old customs, fearing the consequences. Christian missionaries arrived on the islands, converting some, but many skeptics remained. In one notable instance, a trial was held, pitting the Christian faith against pagan deities and their representative, known as a berserker, a person who, to put it mildly, was characterized by extraordinary rage and frenzy. Christian preachers issued a challenge. "We will light a fire, and you pagans will light yours. If the berserker walks through your fire but cannot walk through ours, then we will know that Christianity has triumphed. If he cannot walk through yours, then we will know that paganism has triumphed." This event resembled an ancient duel described in the Old Testament. Sources indicate that the Viking berserker easily walked through the fire lit by the pagans, but could not overcome the flames lit by the Christians. Thus, all present were convinced of the truth of Christianity and adopted the new faith. In Norway, engulfed in internal strife, a powerful impetus for future Viking unity was the emergence of an extraordinary figure, the young Harald Hardrada. He was the half-brother of King Olaf of Norway and his legitimate heir. At only 15, Harald was already involved in a bloody Viking civil war, finding himself on the losing side. However, refusing to accept defeat, Harald returned with a thirst for vengeance, forging his destiny in the fire of battles, staining it with the blood of his opponents. In those times, Vikings descended upon European lands like a devastating epidemic. Initially, their raids targeted defenseless monasteries, unable to resist, but soon the invaders expanded their destructive activities, sowing terror across the continent. Eventually, Vikings turned their weapons on each other, and Norway itself plunged into civil war. In 1030, the fateful Battle of Stiklestad brought them into a deadly clash. In 1047 AD, after a long period of asserting his claim to the throne, Harald Hardrada decisively ensured his power in Norway remained absolutely undisputed. That same year, he launched a ruthless campaign to eradicate his opponents, using a combination of calculated tactics and brutal vengeance. King Harold unleashed furious wrath upon anyone who dared oppose him. It was in 1047 AD, after many years of persistent pursuit and acquisition of power, that Harald Hardrada officially ascended the Norwegian throne, taking the title of king. He ruled over the Vikings relying solely on brute force. Harald's troops were exceptionally ruthless, systematically ravaging farms and destroying villages of those who challenged him. Their message was clear and unambiguous: either unconditional submission or inevitable death. Throughout the country, those disloyal to Harald paid the highest price. In the famous saga of King Harald, the monarch himself celebrated his insatiable cruelty, uttering the following words: "I kill without remorse, and remember all my killings. Treason must be suppressed by any means before it consumes me. Oaks of rebellion grow from acorns of betrayal." When the last rebellion was finally suppressed, it was time for lavish celebrations. King Harold's loyal supporters filled his longhouse, where a grand feast was held. Among Vikings, possessing significant wealth, especially large amounts of gold, made a person extremely influential. It was through generous distributions of treasures that chieftains assembled their armies. Warriors needed not only sustenance, but also gifts of gold, for this was their primary goal. A lord needed to be able to bestow a gold ring for outstanding deeds or present a gold chalice as recognition. Consequently, amassing vast amounts of treasure was vital. Possessing such wealth elevated a person in the eyes of his kinsmen, which was one of Harold's main goals when he carried out palace raids, accumulating immense hoards of gold. A Viking lord, among other things, attracted people by the strength of his personality and had to possess an impeccable reputation as a victor, one capable of leading to great triumphs and warding off destruction. Thus, people gathered in these vast halls. Grand feasts were held where everyone received ample gold and drank much mead. From time to time, these gatherings might be interrupted as warriors took up their swords and set off for another massacre. However, in most cases, it was a great Viking feast, serving as a central element of Viking life. It was in the Great Hall that the most important Viking political agreements were made, strategic alliances forged, and supreme power exercised. This system was strikingly flexible, allowing Vikings to adapt to any situation, maneuver quickly, and reconfigure. It could change instantly if a leader fell, whether through death in battle, humiliation, or any other circumstance, and then someone else would immediately rise, often coming from a completely unexpected direction. Taking Kiev as a model for a prosperous trade center, King Harold decided to establish his own large commercial hub in a strategically important coastal city where goods from all corners of the world could circulate. This city was destined to be Oslo, which later became one of the region's greatest ports. King Harold deeply understood that trade could unite the Viking people and bring them desired wealth and stability. Oslo's markets teemed with diverse goods from Viking lands themselves: wheat and vegetables, furs and textiles. Mighty Viking longships brought goods from all the known world: exotic spices, gold, finest textiles, precious stones, and slaves. These markets actively sold pottery and glass from Germany, exquisite silver jewelry from France, and even coins arriving from distant Arab lands. The Viking people proved themselves astute and skillful traders. As Oslo grew and prospered, the daily life of this vibrant trading community was revealed in items found in burials alongside richly adorned weapons, exquisite jewelry, and simple wooden idols of the Vikings themselves. However, the development of such a significant trade center only intensified Harold's insatiable appetite for even greater wealth and absolute control. Harold concluded that he needed a more ambitious goal, and that goal became England. And so he boarded a ship, joined, of course, by the rebellious brother of the English king, and Harald Hardrada set off on this distant and perilous journey. Gazing at England, Harold undoubtedly envisioned his own vast empire, stretching as far as his valiant longships could reach. Once an exile and a refugee, he had managed to gain astonishing power and colossal political influence among his warlike people. He had already subdued the most powerful of his own Viking enemies, and his actions met with only slight resistance. England, with all its immense riches, seemed easily attainable for his iron grip. However, A formidable and highly disciplined army awaited Harold and his men, as well as a struggle that surpassed all the challenges he had ever faced. In late September 1066 AD, a rider galloped into the city of York with grim and extremely urgent news. The Viking king Harald Hardrada was relentlessly approaching. The English were well aware of his reputation for ruthless cruelty. Only swift and decisive action combined with the greatest bravery could halt his advance. Beginning his military campaign in the coastal lands, Harold soon encountered a series of fierce clashes, which, however, quickly led to a feeling of almost inevitable victory. The city of York seemed ready to bow to the conqueror. In anticipation of triumph, Harold, taking part of his forces with him, moved towards Stamford Bridge, located about 7 miles from the city walls. There he expected to receive tribute and hostages from York's leaders, symbolizing complete submission. Indeed, Harold's confidence that northern England was already completely under his control had reached such a degree that he did not gather his full complement of troops, and many of his warriors even left their armor behind. However, the English showed no such complacency. Their monarch, King Harold Godwin's son, undertook a rapid forced march with his soldiers through thick forests, intending to cut off the Viking army's retreat. The swordsmen were clad in sturdy chainmail, and the archers were fully and well-equipped. At the moment the English army appeared, at least, so ancient sagas tell us, the Vikings were seized with complete astonishment, watching shining armor approach them under the midday sun. At first, they couldn't understand who was before them. Only when the uninvited guests came close enough did the Vikings recognize them as the enemy. According to this saga of King Harold, this sight appeared to them like a sheet of ice, as countless blades glittered simultaneously. At this critical moment, Harold made a fatal decision. Instead of organizing a retreat and waiting for the main forces left on the ships to